Hello friends, hope you're doing well. Today I'm in Luminar Neo and I'm going to do an unscripted video. This is basically me jumping into a photo edit without a plan, without a safety net. I have no notes. I've not edited this photo, and I just want to kind of do this stuff every now and then because it's kind of like a live showing, if you will, my behind the scenes kind of into my thought process, that sort of stuff. Basically share how I approach a photo edit and what I'm going to do to kind of correct any problems and do kind of my creative thing. So this one is a little bit different than ones in the past, and that's because this is a set of 3 brackets. I'm going to be using the HDR merge function, and so I'm going to HDR merge it and then edit it. And I don't know about you, but I've been playing with HDR merge a lot. I actually have some things I'm going to be releasing soon around HDR merge. If you want to hear about that, make sure you subscribe to my newsletter on my website. I'll also be sharing some information here, but of course my newsletter folks, they hear first. Anyway, let's take a look. These are the 3 photos. They are from Venice, Italy. There's the dark one, which you can see is a -4. This is at f16. And there's the medium one, which is a -2. And then there's the bright one, which is a 0 exposure value. So I just need to grab these 3 and highlight, shift, and drag them over to HDR merge. And if you're not familiar, click that little button, auto alignment, chromatic aberration reduction, ghost reduction, all that. You can choose the reference image. I generally use the middle one, but it depends on if there's a lot of movement. We do have some boats here, but I think it's going to be okay. It wasn't like it's a small canal, right? There's not like a ton of traffic. So I'm going to go ahead and hit merge and let the HDR merge function do its tone mapping, kind of work its like light magic and come up with a blended HDR exposure. So I'm going to wait on that, and then once that's ready, we'll keep going. Okay, we're back, and here it is. Now, for me, I look at this photo and I think, well, I don't know if the verticals are off or it's just Venice, which is like kind of sinking and things are crooked. I don't know, but I want to take a look at the verticals, and that's develop. And by the way, I always start every edit, no matter what, in develop. I highly recommend that. I'm going to take a look here at lens distortion and see if there's any of that might help. It actually maybe helps a little bit. So I'm about a 6 there. Let me look at transform. This automatic transform option can sometimes be kind of handy. And yeah, that actually helped quite a bit. So those 2 things I think made a nice impact on the photo. I'm gonna go ahead and increase contrast, which is kind of basically, I pretty much always start right here with light. I'm gonna pull the highlights down pretty significantly. I'm gonna lift the shadows a ton. One of the things about HDR, and you'll notice this on the base HDR, is it because it balances the light so well, everything's pretty well lit up. You may like that. And when I was first into HDR like 10, 12 years ago, I loved that about HDR. But now I'm kind of the opinion that it's okay to have a little shadow. That's real, and you expect to see some shadow. So I did lift the shadows a little bit, but I actually think I'm going to pull them down a little bit and just create a little bit more shadow in the photo. And you can do the same by playing with the blacks and whites, right? So you can see as I move that blacks, it's getting a little bit darker in the shadow, which kind of makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to do that. The other thing to think about, for me, the reflection gets a little crisper and a little more intense when I've adjusted contrast and that sort of thing, because there's a bright sky behind this that building there in the distance. Now, this is a sunset. I'm going to try it warmer, but I don't know how much I'm going to like that versus cooler. I'm a little torn here, my friends. I'm a little torn. I think I'm going to try just a tad warmer, like a 1 or a 2, but I want to try tint as well, because one of the things I don't want to do is make it really, really yellow. There's a lot of that kind of earth tone, that stucco kind of yellowy kind of look. And if you think about it, on the color wheel, yellow, the opposite color is blue, hence why I was kind of thinking about cooling it off. And in fact, I think I'm going to go back and try that, because those 2 colors are complementary, which means they look really good together. So if you can amp up some of those warm tones, but then also have a nice balance of cool tones, you get a really pleasing image. Something I think about. I don't always succeed at delivering that in my images because, you know, I'm human and I screw things up, or I just have a different look in mind or whatever. But I'm going to pull this tint down, maybe a tiny bit of vibrance, but I tend not to do a whole lot with my colors in temperature, tint, saturation, vibrance here in develop. Just do a little bit. I like to do a little bit of sharpening, 20 to 25, not a ton. And I think I'm good. I mean, if you take a look at develop, there it is before and there it is now. Actually looks a little bit more realistic, and that's what I'm talking about with the light being so evenly distributed with an HDR photo, which is kind of the point of an HDR. For me, it's almost a dead giveaway when I see that somebody's either done an HDR with full-on tone mapping or done a blended exposure, or just really lifted the shadows a whole lot and pulled down the highlights and made it kind of a high dynamic range photo with a single image. And again, there's nothing wrong with it, but depending on the time of day and the lighting situation, our human eye expects to see some shadow. And so I tend to add it back, unless it's a bright sunny day and you're in the park, whatever, you're not going to see a lot of shadow. But a photo like this, buildings, the sun's out of frame and just kind of barely glowing in the distance, you just expect to see some shadow. So I'll shut up about that. I'm going to move on to super contrast, which is tool number 2, which, by the way, if you didn't see that video, I talk about why I always start with develop, and then my second tool is always super contrast. I'm going to kind of do a little bit of that here. Just take a look, kind of like how that's impacting the sky. It's kind of taming that brightness a little bit. That does a good job of lifting some of the dark contrast. And yeah, I just talked about adding shadow, and I'm not going to pull it back all the way, but I go back and forth a lot in my edit. My editing process is incredibly fluid. I think actually increasing the shadows contrast a little bit looks pretty nice. So super contrast, I don't do a big move really ever, but it adds a nice subtle little pop. Let me take a look. There it is before, and there it is now. One thing to note is when you increase contrast, the colors do get a little bit richer. If you look at that building on the right-hand side, for me, there it is before. It's definitely orange, and it's like, wow, that's a stucco orange, burnt sienna, kind of looks like Italy, because it is. And when I let go and show you the after, it's a little bit richer because of that contrast. So just keep that in mind. You will impact the overall look of color when you adjust contrast, which is why I adjust light first. That's why I go develop and then super contrast, because I'm getting the light, and that's going to impact color. So I don't want to run off first thing and say, ooh, it's Italy, great colors, let's jack up that saturation. Oh, let me get to the contrast now. And then I feel like your colors get really out of whack and overdone. So I tend to save colors for later, and generally speaking, kind of last. Now, I do want to add a little bit of structure because, I mean, hey, this is Italy and this is stucco kind of stuff, and it just looks cool. And what I'm going to do, I'm going kind of high here, and that's because I'm kind of cranking it up. I kind of like to, generally speaking, when you do that kind of stuff with structure, it'll show up in the sky pretty significantly if you have a lot of clouds. When you have basically a flat sky like that with nothing in it, it's not showing up. If I show you the before, structure AI, and the after, you'll notice obviously the buildings look crispier, but the sky, I mean, it's a little bit different, but not a lot. The reason I bring that up is because if I were to add that much structure to a photo with a really busy, cloudy, intense sunset kind of thing, it would probably look really bad. Which means if I wanted that much structure in the buildings, I would need to remove it from the sky, and I would also remove it from the reflection in the water. I'm not going to do that here right now because this is a live edit, and I don't see enough of an impact to make me say, ooh, I really need to do that, but I wanted to point it out. And now that I look at it, I'm going to pull that back a little bit because I also boosted it. Boost is just an accelerant to whatever you've done with the amount slider. So I've got plenty going on there. The other thing to note is structure. When you lift it, look at these shadows, like in those trees in the distance, the shadows are getting brightened. So just be careful. Even though structure is about structure or, increasing some crunchy kind of detail, it's also impacting the light, which goes back to what I said in the beginning, is like I do light first. And so anyway, just kind of, again, sharing my thoughts. Now, one of the things I like about the sun being out of frame in the distance is that the sun is out of frame in the distance. And so I'm going to go in and I'm going to try something here. I'm going to get a mask and I'm going to get a radial gradient, and I'm going to drop it. It looks to me like the sun is kind of behind over here. I'm going to do something about like that, and I'm going to scoot this over a little bit, and maybe something, I don't really know. This is probably going to need to be adjusted. Actually, I need to feather it more. So I love the fade / feather kind of thing, and in fact I need to invert it because I want it to be like that. And so now you can see the fade and the feathering a little bit better. And what I'm going to do here is actually just play off that brightness of the sun and increase that brightness as the sun, as though the sun is kind of shining through that section between those buildings in the distance. And I'm going to slightly warm it up as well. So that just creates a little bit more of a, I don't know, a sun look, for lack of a better word. If I show you the before, there it is, much flatter. And after, it's probably a little too intense. Probably need to redo the mask. A big ask that I have of the Luminar team is allow me to go back and edit that mask. I can't really do that. I have to go back in and redo it. So let me do that here and see if I can get a little bit better look. And let's go for an invert, slightly larger like that. I'm going to scoot that over, slightly larger there, and a really big fade. Actually, I'm going to bring this down a little bit. That's too much, and that's too much. I don't know. It's something that I recommend you take your time playing around with. But again, it's a little bit off. It's creating a little bit of a halo here. This is a live edit. I would take my time to go figure out how I want that to look, but what I'm looking for, the effect that I'm going for, is the same whether my mask looks really good here or not. And that is, I want to take the sun that's theoretically coming through that crack between the buildings, and I want to amp it up and create a little bit of that coming through. And that just looks bad. Let me go fix that, and then we'll fast forward the video. Okay, I think this is a little bit better. A much bigger fade in the mask and a little bit less on the exposure and the temperature, just a slight adjustment. So there it is before, and there it is now. Highly recommend that you take your time with your edits. Okay, so I've got develop done. I feel like I've got the light looking the way I would like it to look. I do see the spot in the sky. I'm not going to remove that in this video because it's kind of a live edit. You just click on erase, click on remove dust spots, and it's gone. Now I do want to play with the colors a little bit, so I'm going to go into color harmony, and I'm going to try a little bit of brilliance and warmth. Again, there's a lot of color in this already. When you're saturating or increasing the intensity of colors, do not saturate or increase the intensity of every color very much. It tends to look better if you have like a dominant color that's fairly saturated. There's a lot here, but I would say the oranges with the building on the left and the right and some of the orange in the boats, that's kind of the mostly dominant color. So you want to be careful not to oversaturate everything. And in fact, because there's so much warmth, I'm actually going to try going overall a little bit cooler. Yeah, I kind of like that. I like that blue kind of playing off and maybe a tad more brilliant. I'm going to try split color warmth. And this is great for adjusting those cools and warms independently. I'm gonna maybe go a tad cooler and a tad warmer with the warm stuff. Again, just be careful. The nice thing is down in this color tool here in Essentials, you have the ability to go into individual color channels and make some adjustments. And while I'm at it, I'm gonna go into my favorite, which is color balance. And one thing I like to often do is add a little bit of blue into the shadows. Shadows are dark by definition, and blue is like a dark color, and shadows and blue kind of go together for me. Whereas I tend to put warm stuff into the highlights. So a tiny bit there in the shadows, and I'm going to go into the highlights and just see what it looks like to add a little magenta. I'm creating a little bit more of that twilight kind of sunset look, maybe a tiny bit of red. Don't know how this is going to look. Hey, it's a live edit, and you know, none of us know. Maybe a tiny bit of yellow. I'm going to actually dump the yellow. Let me just take a look at this overall color-wise. There it is before, there it is now. I think that looks pretty good. However, I realized something, and that is one of the things I've done is that I've created too much blue in like that building and that building and that building. And so what I need to do is go into color, and I need to go into HSL, and I need to go into saturation, and I need to take the blue saturation down so that it looks a little bit whiter in those areas. And then I need to go into masking, and I need to go to brush, and I need to just paint that adjustment in to the areas that I was talking about. So that would be that building. That'll be the front of this building. That'll be a little bit here on this building. I just don't want these buildings that should be kind of a warmer tone to look too blue. I'm also going to do that right over here and also on this little bit of building here. I just don't want, in fact, I'm just going to get some of that. I think the rest looks pretty good. So all I've done there is taken the blue down, and I don't even know how well you can tell, but I'm going to go back into adjustments. I might drop it a little bit more. And while you're at it, you can also put on the vibrance. Now, keep in mind, I painted over some of that brick on the left, so it's going to reduce the vibrance of the red, but overall, I can just reduce the vibrance of every color that's impacted by that mask I just made. So I'm going to go low on vibrance and low on negative saturation just to control the colors. But I think that's made the blue that was kind of creeping into those buildings. There it is more blue. And there it is now, a bit tamer. The blue looks better, but also because there's a fair amount of red in that brick, it actually worked out, I think, that I masked over the brick and reduced the saturation and vibrance there, because that brick is a red and it's going to compete, because they're intense colors, it's going to compete with the orange in those buildings. And those are kind of the things that are kind of framing it for me. So I think my color moves overall are pretty good. Now I want to take a look at the overall photo. That's what I started with, quite a bit flatter. It was an HDR, so the base HDR is pretty much always flat. We did some adjustments to a number of different things, and I think we got a much better looking photo. One thing I like to try on photos is using Accent AI just in targeted areas, and a radial gradient is a good way to do that targeting. So I'm going to come in with a radial gradient. I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to pull this down and kind of scoot it across the middle, for lack of a better word, kind of dead center on that middle of the photo, something about like that. And then all I'm going to do is give it a little bit of bump, and that's going to increase the brightness there, so it's acting a little bit like inner light on a vignette, except it's not just light. Be careful, because Accent AI does a lot of stuff, so you don't want to overdo it. But if you look at the before, it's definitely darker through there, and after, now it's a bit brighter. But another thing to think about, these are just, I'm doing this live, so I'm just sharing all my thoughts. The other thing I'm thinking about is be careful, because it does brighten so much stuff. It's also brightening some of the shadow that's in that tree. So it's a delicate thing. You got to be careful. But you know what that did? That made me think, go into color and go into luminance, go into green and pull that down. And hey, I just darkened those trees again, because they were kind of brighter, and you could go brighter and pull up some of that color, but again, too much color, too much intensity overwhelms the senses. You get that huge sugar rush of color, and there's a lot of color in this image. So darkening that and pulling down the saturation of the green, I think is a good play here. So I'm going to pull the saturation down as well. There's not really a lot of any other green in the photo to speak of. That reduces a little bit of that color. And while I'm at it, I'm going to slightly pull down the reds and the oranges, just because they're pretty intense, my friends, pretty intense. So maybe something like that. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. And I think I'll just wrap it up with a vignette. I'm going to choose my subject, and I'm going to put it slightly lower than dead center. And I'm going to go ahead and drop the size and the amount. That's too much. I like to come over here. I like my feathering to be high. I kind of like not round, but a little bit more square, and a tiny bit of inner light, which is kind of doubling up on what I did with Accent AI. So I'm not going to use very much, but I want clear visibility, because the reflections in the canal is a big thing for me here. And I think that's it, my friends. That is a full unscripted edit using HDR merge. Started with 3 exposures, dark, medium, and bright, -4, -2, 0, as I recall, and blended them, fixed the verticals, that sort of thing, played a lot with color, and there I am. The only thing I need to do is erase the dust spots. That's automatic and easy, and you know how that goes. But I think I made a pretty good photo. Honestly, if I wasn't racing, so to speak, here, I would probably be playing around with a few other things. And yes, the sky replacement is definitely an option here, but I just wanted to play with what I had. I didn't want to add anything to it. But yeah, the sky was not exactly exciting. Adding a sky replacement of some sunset and picking up the reflection would be pretty cool. I just didn't want to do it here, because I was just trying to keep with the stuff that was already in the photo. That's how it went today, my friends. Hope it gives you some idea about both what I'm doing with HDR merge, how I'm using it, but also how I'm thinking about editing and my workflow and that sort of thing. I'll be back soon with more videos. Hope you guys are having a great day. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I'll be back soon. You guys take care, and until then, adios.